This video is a Patreon request, but the request itself warrants perception. I did notice that since this channel began to pick up an audience, most of my viewers are based in the United States or other English-speaking areas of the world that are not the UK. Many of my overseas viewers are curious to hear me talk about certain places in the UK where they film these Tudor dramas. Also, a lot of my American viewers may be thinking, I need to get out of this country. Where's somewhere that also speaks English and has lots of nice places and lots of locations that are older than the United States itself? The earliest Tudor dramas tended to use a lot of sets, especially the ones made by Hollywood. But after World War II, they started to use actual locations to make their dramas seem more authentic. Britain has strict laws when it comes to the conservation of old buildings, and many of them are isolated in the specific time period they were built, or it contains a variety of eras. Places like Newstead Abbey in Nottinghamshire keeps a large portion of its pre-Reformation structure, but the interior builds heavily on Georgian and Victorian Gothic aesthetics. Some rooms look like they could come from Dracula's castle. P.S. You should visit Newstead Abbey. It's very underrated. The gardens are beautiful. It only costs £6 to park and £12 per person to go around the house, if said house is open. Anyway, as I've covered one Tudor drama after another, I've been able to pick up exactly where the piece is situated from sight alone. Sometimes these locations are also used for fantasy movies and TV shows, or adaptations of classic literature that's set in other time periods. So I've listed what I think are the 10 most used locations for these dramas in no particular order. All of these are in England specifically, so places where they filmed The Tudors or Reign won't be included, as they're strictly filmed in Ireland or Canada. Berkeley Castle, Gloucestershire. Located in southwest Gloucestershire, quite close to the River Severn, Berkeley Castle is famous for being the place where Edward II was assassinated. Isabella of France and Roger Mortimer held him there for 5 months after deposing him and executing his lover, Hugh Despenser. Edward's supporters kept trying and failing to free him. So on the 21st of September 1327, Edward was murdered in his bed. Speculation ranges from him being smothered to being sodomised with a red-hot poker. At present, the castle is owned by the Berkeley family, and while it is in private hands, it is open to visitors for a fee of £16 for adults, £15 for concessions and £8 for children. On the other side of the river you can also find Tintern Abbey, a ruin immortalised by the works of William Wordsworth. Berkeley's interiors and exteriors have been used for a wide range of Tudor period pieces, including ITV's Henry VIII, The White Princess, The Spanish Princess, Wolf Hall, and both adaptations of The Other Boleyn Girl. In the 2003 adaptation's case, Berkeley was used for the majority of the shoot. The BBC has also used Berkeley for The Legend of Dick and Dom, Father Brown, Simon Sharma's A History of Britain, and The Hollow Crown. Other pieces include 2019's The King, Johnny English Strikes Again, Gallivant, an adaptation of Miss Marple, The Canterville Ghost, and the English language remake of Les Visiteurs. Broughton Castle, Oxfordshire. Broughton Castle is a location you'll mostly recognise from its exterior. It's roughly an hour's drive north from the city of Oxford. Since it was built in 1306, it changed hands and was reconstructed several times. Its castle name is more of a misnomer, as it was intended to be a country manor when Sir John de Broughton began construction and worked the 3 existing streams into a moat. The Fiennes family came to own it in the mid-1400s, rebuilding it in the Tudor style in 1550. And yes, that is the same Fiennes family that both Ralph Fiennes and Joseph Fiennes are descended from. The castle became a stronghold for the Roundheads during the English Civil War and was briefly occupied by the Royalists. I guess its affiliation with Oliver Cromwell helped prevent it from being demolished after the war, in the way Nottingham Castle was. It is closed to visitors during the winter. And one thing I will say is always check the dates before visiting, because a lot of these country houses and castles etc. will close during the winter months. The gatehouse and front lawn of the house are some of the most filmed parts of the property, but there is also a formal garden. I had to dig a little deeper in this case because neither Wikipedia nor IMDb list every single piece of media which used the castle. One of the earliest uses was in the Six Wives of Henry VIII series, for one of its few on-location scenes as Wolf Hall, the previous seat of the Seymour family. because the real Wolf Hall was long since demolished. It has also played its part in a lot of dramas involving Lady Jane Grey. First it was used in 1986's Lady Jane, and then used as Chelsea House in Becoming Elizabeth, and finally in My Lady Jane as Durham House. It has also been used in The Virgin Queen, Shakespeare in Love and Wolf Hall. You'd think that the place would have taken more advantage of its relatives and have more films starring the Fiennes brothers to its name. Other period pieces include the 2011 version of Jane Eyre, The Madness of King George, and 1996's Emma, starring Kate Beckinsale, for Donwell Abbey, aka Mr. Knightley's home. You'll also see it in The Scarlet Pimpernel, Keeping Up Appearances, and The Slipper and the Rose. Dover Castle, Kent. Due to its medieval exterior, Dover Castle is often used in place of the Tower of London. A good 50 pieces of film and television have used Dover Castle as a filming location. Dover is the closest part of the British Isles to mainland Europe. Thus, Dover Castle was designed to be a stronghold. It also has a lighthouse, dating back to Roman times. The castle has been expanded and maintained over the centuries, used mainly as a frontline defence against invaders from France, be it Louis VIII in 1216, who failed to take the castle, or Napoleon Bonaparte, who always planned to invade Britain, but never got round to it. Today, Dover Castle is one of the most recognisable properties owned by English Heritage. If you have an English Heritage membership, you can visit for free. And yes, as I said, when used in a Tudor drama, Dover Castle is primarily used as a stand-in for the Tower of London. Specifically, it is used for execution scenes. The stone courtyard has been seen in the 2008 Other Boleyn Girl and Wolf Hall for Anne Boleyn's execution, using opposite sides of the courtyard to do so. So while Natalie Portman's on one side, Claire Foy is on the other, possibly doing the Spider-Man pointing meme, while Mark Rylance stands in the middle, doing the face. But it was also used in both Lady Jane and My Lady Jane for the titular Jane Grey's execution scenes. The Hollow Crown also uses Dover Castle as the tower, using it for such scenes as the murder of the Duke of Gloucester and that of Henry VI. Its place in sci-fi and fantasy has ranged from the Doctor Who serial The Mind of Evil, Renegade Nell, Into the Woods, Avengers Age of Ultron, and that trippy-ass adaptation of The Wind in the Willows, which featured 2/3 of the Monty Python cast. I say 2/3 because Terry Gilliam was unavailable due to other projects, and Graham Chapman was unavailable because he was dead. Gloucester Cathedral, Gloucestershire. You will likely recognise Gloucester Cathedral from one shot, that being this corridor, which you have likely seen outside of Tudor dramas just as much as in them. Gloucester Cathedral was consecrated way back in the Norman period, in the year 1100. Many holy places had been built previously, but they were often met with disaster or were abandoned by the owners. William the Conqueror was in Gloucester in 1085, when he began work on the Domesday Book, and he tasked Abbot Thurlow with building what would become the cathedral. William would not see its completion as he died in 1087. Edward II would be buried there after he was killed. It was an abbey until 1540, when Henry VIII dissolved it and founded an Anglican cathedral in its place. Though temporarily abolished during the Civil War, Charles II would reinstate it. Today, Gloucester Cathedral is in the seat of Rachel Trewick, the first female Anglican bishop. The cloister corridors date back to the 14th century, and these are the places in which many Tudor dramas take place. Wolf Hall used the cloisters to represent the monasteries visited by Cromwell and his cronies, while the Gregory Verse series would use the cloisters to represent corridors at Westminster Palace. 2018's Mary Queen of Scots uses the cloisters for the scene where Elizabeth walks through her courtiers, and you will also see it in David Starkey's Six Wives documentary. The Hollow Crown uses many parts of the cathedral, including the courtyard, and Doctor Who has filmed The Next Doctor and Fugitive of the Jadoon there. You'll also see the cloisters in the first, second and sixth Harry Potter movies to represent the corridors of Hogwarts, but I've said repeatedly that franchise is dead to me. Moving on. Great Chalfield Manor, Wiltshire. This one hasn't been in as many Tudor dramas as the rest, but I feel that it's a location that's being used more regularly recently. Great Chalfield Manor is late medieval rather than Tudor, as it was built between 1465 and 1480 by Thomas Tropnell. Evidence of an older structure are still found on the grounds to this day. My guess is this was a house destroyed during the Wars of the Roses, and Tropnell built his house on top of it. In 1550, Anne Tropnell married John Eyre, and the heirs owned the house until 1631 when Sir Richard Gurney bought it. Over the years the interior was altered. The Fuller family purchased the house at the turn of the 20th century and gave the estate a thorough restoration. At present, while Robert Floyd lives at Great Chalfield, the house and estate is now run by the National Trust. Like with English Heritage, a National Trust membership gets you free access to any of its properties. However, Great Chalfield is one of those estates where you can only enter the house via guided tours at fixed times. I would pre-book before visiting. As I said, this has become a recent filming spot for Tudor dramas, the earliest of which is the 2008 Other Boleyn Girl, as the Rochford Hall exterior at the beginning of the movie. Becoming Elizabeth, the White Princess, and My Lady Jane also used the manor, but it has become best known as the stand-in for Austin Friars, Thomas Cromwell's home in Wolf Hall. The BBC have also used it as a filming location for Wives and Daughters, as well as the 2007 adaptation of Persuasion and the Tess of the D'Urbervilles miniseries, and it is also one of the filming locations for Poldark. Haddon Hall, Derbyshire. Located near Bakewell, home of the famous Bakewell tart, Haddon Hall is one of those locations I won't stop talking about. It's also the only property on this list I've actually been to. This is typically the go-to place when you want to film a Tudor drama, or an eerie period piece, or a fun fantasy movie. More often than not, you'll see the lower courtyard being filmed, or the staircase in the hall, or the long gallery. Some parts of the house are as old as the 11th century. It was given fortified ramparts towards the end of that century, and changed hands several times. In the mid-1560s, it came into the ownership of the Duke of Rutland, when he married Dorothy Vernon, the daughter of the then owner, Sir George Vernon. Their love story has been immortalised in plays, books and films. The house remains in private ownership, but allow visitors for a price of £26 for adults, £24 for concessions and £22 for students, and free entry for children under 15. When I went there I was technically still a student, so they gave me student discount, which was nice. Derbyshire residents have discounted entry. However, a portion of the house is marked private for the residents, including the upper courtyard. There is seemingly no end to the Tudor dramas they filmed there. There was Elizabeth 1998, Lady Jane in place of Bradgate Park, The Twisted Tale of Bloody Mary, heaven help us, quite a large chunk of Tudor documentaries, as well as Becoming Elizabeth, Wolf Hall, and most recently, Firebrand. Considering that they filmed Firebrand and The Mirror and the Light closely together, you have to wonder if the staff got confused over which Tudor drama was being filmed that day. I personally hope that there's a story of someone who worked there and wanted to get Jude Law's autograph, so they handed it to a crew member saying, "Can you please get me Henry VIII's autograph?" And it came back to them and they got Damian Lewis's signature instead. You'll also recognise it from The Princess Bride as the exterior shots of the castle, where this unforgettable scene happened.
Boo! Boo! Rubbish! Filth! Slime! Muck! Boo! Boo! Boo!
It was once again used as a location in The Hollow Crown and the BBC adaptation of The Silver Chair. And also, because I never shut up about it whenever Haddon Hall comes up in a video, not one, not two, but 3 adaptations of Jane Eyre used Haddon Hall for Thornfield Hall. There was the Zeffirelli version in 1996 starring Charlotte Gainsbourg and William Hurt, followed by the 2006 miniseries, which I think is the best adaptation, starring Ruth Wilson and Toby Stephens. And then there was the mind-numbing boredom that was the 2011 film, with Mia Wasikowska and Michael Fassbender. It also briefly appears in the 2005 Pride and Prejudice and Gunpowder. Those are 2 separate things. Hatfield House, Hertfordshire. Hatfield House is best known as the primary residence of Elizabeth I before she became Queen. It was on this estate that she was found walking under a tree on the 19th of November 1558, when news arrived of her sister's death. The house you currently see is not the actual house where Elizabeth grew up. The original, built in 1497, is called the Old Palace, and situated not far from the actual house. Elizabeth would often spend long stretches of time at Hatfield away from the court, either because of plague or because she was not held in high favour. It isn't known how often she visited after her ascension, but the house contains many of her possessions. King James I gave the estate to Robert Cecil, who built the house you see today in its Jacobean style. In World War I, the army used the grounds to test the first British tanks, creating the imitation of trench warfare, including barbed wire and sandbags. During World War II, the house was used to help rehabilitate prisoners of war back into civilian life. Hatfield is currently held by the National Register of Historic Parks and Gardens, and Robert Gascoigne Cecil, Marquess of Salisbury, currently resides there. Prices for entry range from £16 to £26 for adults, depending on whether you want to visit the house or not. Another thing I haven't mentioned is when you buy tickets to some of these places, they will have prices on whether you just want to visit the gardens or if you want to visit the house and the gardens. House and gardens is always a bit more expensive. IMDb lists 79 pieces of media to have used Hatfield as a filming location. In the Tudor context, it has been used in Shakespeare in Love, Henry VIII and his 6 wives, Elizabeth the Golden Age, Orlando, along with several sketches in Horrible Histories, and Stuart period pieces include Cromwell, Stage Beauty, The Favourite, and a certain musician named Adam Ant used it in his music video for Stand and Deliver. The Jonas Brothers also used it for Sucker. I will always recognise Hatfield as the location for Croft Manor in the first 2 Tomb Raider movies, but the use of Hatfield House for Croft Manor was so impactful that the game developers decided to use Hatfield's exterior for future games, including the Survivor trilogy. Hever Castle, Kent. I had to include this one because it actually has a connection to 2 of Henry VIII's wives, Anne Boleyn and Anna of Cleves. Originally built in 1270, it was bought from the Fiennes family, that same family from Broughton Castle, by Geoffrey Boleyn in 1462, rather than be used as a stronghold or a garrison, as was the purpose of a castle at the time. It was converted into a manor house with the look of a castle. This would also be where Anne Boleyn and her siblings, Mary and George, would spend their childhood before they were sent to be educated abroad. Anne would often retreat back to Hever when Henry VIII was pursuing her, though he would regularly follow. Following the death of Anne's father, Thomas Boleyn, Hever Castle was owned by the Crown. Henry would give it to Anna von Cleves when he divorced her. Anna would pass away in 1557. The Waldegrave family took ownership of the castle, and it would change hands a few times until 1903, when the American William Waldorf Astor bought the castle. He was the one who redecorated the castle's interior to resemble the Tudor aesthetic. And before you ask, yes, he was related to the J.J. Astor who died on the Titanic. They were cousins. His renovations include a handful of cottages nearby, dubbed the Tudor Village. Visiting the castle is slightly cheaper if you book ahead online, or if you plan to visit regularly, you can book a membership that'll last you a year. It is one of the UK's most popular tourist spots. It was first used for a Tudor drama in Anne of the Thousand Days, and later used in Henry VIII and his 6 wives, and the BBC television Shakespeare adaptation of Henry VIII. Pensthurst Palace, Kent. This is another location you'll likely recognise from cultural osmosis. With it being built in the 14th century, it is often used for period pieces and fantasy because it can be used to fit a variety of time periods. After its construction, it came to be an estate owned by the Duchy of Buckingham. However, in 1521, Henry VIII arrested and executed the then Duke, Edward Stafford, and seized the Duke's possessions for himself. Henry would often use visiting Pensthurst as an excuse for visiting Anne Boleyn at Hever, as both properties are quite close to each other. It was another one of those estates which Anna von Cleves received in her settlement. Edward VI would confiscate it from her and give it to the Sidney family. It has remained in the possession of the Sidneys ever since. The parkland surrounding the house and its gardens is free to access all year. Entry to the house and gardens is £16 for an adult and £9 for children under 16. Under 5s go free. However, you can also get a year-long season ticket. Pensthurst will, more often than not, appear in a Tudor drama. These include Anne of the Thousand Days, Wolf Hall, the 2008 Other Boleyn Girl, and the first 2 episodes of Elizabeth R. But for you Princess Bride fans out there, you will know that the Great Hall in Pensthurst is where this iconic duel goes down.
Hello! My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die!
I want my father back, you son of a bitch.
Wells Cathedral, Somerset. Finally, we have another cathedral on our hands. Wells Cathedral is another place where they mostly filmed the corridors, or cloisters. However, you're likely to recognise this staircase, which I keep seeing again and again in Tudor dramas, and it's taken me forever to figure out where these steps were. Now the mystery is over. The original foundations of the cathedral were built on a Roman mausoleum, and an abbey church was built while England was still a series of kingdoms. In Wales' case, it was situated in the Kingdom of Wessex. The commencement of building a cathedral began in 1175. In 1245 there was dispute over which diocese owned the cathedral, either the Bishop of Wells or the Bishop of Bath. This in turn created the title of Bishop of Bath and Wells. While it was not fully dissolved during the Reformation, when Edward VI Privy Council went harder on religious reform, any Catholic-leaning objects were removed. It would fall into disrepair following the Civil War, but was restored following the accession of Charles II. Wolf Hall and the Gregory Verse are among the period pieces filmed there, but it was used prominently in Elizabeth the Golden Age as the primary location for Elizabeth's palace. This and its predecessor continued the misconception that Tudor palaces were these great gloomy cathedrals, even though anyone with half a brain cell could tell these were just big churches. Now this isn't a list of all the places where Tudor dramas were filmed, but they are the most popular. A lot of these places I haven't visited, mostly due to the fact that they're quite far away and they're in private ownership, though I would like to visit a few of them. It does surprise me that on this list there is only one English heritage property and one national trust. My guess is that filmmakers and producers are more willing to go for the privately owned country houses. The National Trust, I imagine, is probably quite strict when it comes to film crews coming in. If you get into the Georgian and Regency style dramas, you're more likely to find locations where they're filmed at a National Trust property, so you can go and visit for the price of a membership. Tudor era properties under the National Trust include Hardwick Hall, Canons Ashby, Nunnington House, Benthall Hall, Charlotte Park and Baddesley Clinton, and, for a limited time, Coton Court. Basically just go and drive around Warwickshire. That place is crawling with Tudor aesthetics. In the case of Coton Court, it is going back into private ownership within a year or so. So if you have National Trust membership, I would take advantage of it and go there as soon as you can. English heritage mostly protects castles and famous ruins, but that does include a few monasteries which Henry VIII destroyed. I would suggest visiting Peveril Castle in Derbyshire, just for the view alone. Bolsover Castle also has a spectacular view. Tintagel is a ruined castle by the sea. If your legs are up to it, I would totally take it on board. And then there is Whitby Abbey, which was the inspiration for Dracula. Those are my favourite English heritage properties so far. For my American and Canadian viewers, my advice for visiting some of these properties is pretty much the same advice you would give to a European visiting your country for the first time. Don't expect to cover everything in one go. Yes, Britain is smaller, but these properties are counties apart and well off the beaten track. The grand majority of the time, it's impossible to reach these places without a car. If you get a National Trust or English Heritage membership, make sure the property you're visiting is one of theirs, and also check your opening times. Also, please double check on the day of your visit that the location is actually open. I have occasionally gone to a place only to find out it's not open, either because we came on the wrong day or a place closes after a certain date and doesn't allow visitors until spring the next year. If the house isn't open, the gardens might be. If you are going to one of these privately owned estates, I would book my ticket online because you do save a bit, and also you definitely know what to expect when you get there. These places will often give you a map, and you are going to want to know where the toilets are. At Cork Abbey, they had to build a new block of toilets in the gardens because the only ones were in the courtyard, which was a mile away, and that led to some long awkward queues in the summer. Also, if you go in the summer, some parts might be blocked off because there is a wedding happening. When I went to Haddon Hall, there was a wedding at the top of the gardens. The staff might let you know upon arrival, but yeah, just respect their space. English stately homes are a hot spot for wedding receptions, so please do not gatecrash someone else's wedding. And one more thing, prepare to do a lot of walking, and I mean a lot of walking. If you're lucky, there may be a golf cart or a tractor bus, but those are usually for people with mobility issues. But hey, if you get worn out from all that walking, you can always go and get a cream tea.